My name is Prashant. Uh, I'm principal engineer at Splunk. Uh, Prior to that, I was principal software engineer at Yahoo, where I was busy developing and running Sherpa, which is, if you know, it's Yahoo's key value store, and this is where actually our own Pulsar originated. So, what is agenda for today? So, today's agenda: what is Apache Bookkeeper? Uh, I take it back. What is Apache Bookkeeper State Store? I mean, we all know that what is Apache Bookkeeper, but what is Apache Bookkeeper State Store? Yeah, it's to give you some background information. Is essentially a key value store. But then why we need another key value store? While there are so many different key value store already in open source as well as proprietary, right? Starting from Cassandra to DynamoDB, and there are so many in between. Okay, so what is new key value store had to do with Pulsar? Where should we use it and where we should not use it? How does it look like under the hood? Without going too much into details, because I would like to have that detailed part covered in a separate talk, as a separate design doc. Is it production ready? What are the plans to make it production ready, and what are the production challenges? What are the things we are going to do in near future with this? Uh, how this product going to evolve will be, of course, community driven. But what we at a Splunk are going to do with it, and how we are going to contribute towards this product, Apache Bookkeeper State Store. So what is Apache Bookkeeper State Store? It's a key value store. So it's not a document store. Here only value. It doesn't interpret what is inside the value. It's just UTF-8 string for interprets as a UTF-8 string for a value. Well, it's durable. So of course we all know what is durability means in parlance of our database. Basically, once the write is committed, it's committed, and you are not going to lose it. It's locally replicated. It's essentially, in other words, I can say that it's not geographically replicated. Data will, if you will end up losing the data if entire data center goes out. It's eventually consistent. I mean, but that's not a complete truth at this point. Actually, at this point, it's strongly consistent. I'll talk about it why it is, but probably we'll run it in eventually consistent mode later for scaling requirements. It's fault tolerant, and it's cloud native. So basically, it's built keeping cloud nativity in mind. And currently in Splunk, it's K-Test based deployment. Oh, so yeah, yet another key value store, right? I mean, no disrespect to any key value store out there in the slide. They're all great and solve various use cases. Really, some of them really good key value stores. And I mean, no disrespect to any other key value store who I failed to mention in this space. They are great too. So if there are so many great solutions out there, why want to create more? Why? Because it's an integral part of Apache Bookkeeper, Apache Pulsar ecosystem, right? Why? Uh, we and you. So the idea is why we need another key value store? Why not use an existing one? Because they are not part of Apache Pulsar ecosystem, and they do not want, and you do not want to maintain a completely new unrelated service. while there is already one in Pulsar ecosystem. Apache Pulsar, Apache Bookkeeper State Store uses Zookeeper deployment for Pulsar, same Zookeeper deployment for Pulsar use case. The Pulsar uses same Bookkeeper deployment that Pulsar uses same infrastructure for metrics, dashboard, etc. as Bookkeeper, so you don't have to do anything. And fun part is it's part of Bookkeeper stream code base. So same thing works here, and there is already an existing client-side integration in Apache Pulsar. Actually in function service, Apache Pulsar function service. So much so that if you bring Apache Pulsar in standalone mode now, it automatically brings state store and it's up there, so it's ready to be used. So what is the primary use case? What is the primary use case? So basically, we can store checkpoints and function state in state store, be at source side or sink side. For instance, if an object is being ingested from S3 using Pulsar function, state store can be used to periodically checkpoint the offset of the object, so that if any failure happens, Pulsar function can eventually resume from the last stored checkpoint. Otherwise, it has to start from the beginning, right? So this is just one of the use case. Another use case is, as you know, Zookeeper is used by default to store metadata for Pulsar, right? But there has been effort in Pulsar to provide a pluggable solution to store metadata away from Zookeeper. I mean, we have been seeing so many issues with Zookeeper and so many. I mean, there have been many stories. I mean, it's no disrespect to Zookeeper. It's a really great solution, but it's not solution for all the problems, right? Yeah, but then you can refer to pip 45 in Apache Pulsar for more information on this. So basically, the separating metadata into metadata store and metadata store ext, where metadata store ext can be implemented using Zookeeper or etcd or any other solution. But metadata store, which provides mostly key value sort of service, can be implemented using state store. So basically, we store lots of metadata in Zookeeper. Some of them can be taken out and can be stored in another key value store, which can be a state store. And the good part is we do not have to do anything. It comes readily. It's really available from Bookkeeper itself. And it's not only that. I mean, you can use state store for other various KB store use cases as well. I'm pretty sure community will find many innovative ways to use state store. So what is the data model look like here? So highest level construct is a namespace. Each namespace can have multiple tables, and each table is sharded into multiple table ranges. I'm leaving many other details. For example, their concept of a storage container and whatnot, and metadata container and so on and so forth. But I'm leaving those details for simplicity purpose. And forgive me for like doing hand waving at this. But going forward, for one table, each table is sharded into multiple table ranges. And for instance, one table range can be, let's say, 0x0000 to 0x0000f, and then so on and so forth, if I speak hex. And if I speak decimal, then let's say table range 1 could be 0 to 16, second could be 16 to 32, and so on and so forth. Let's say for a record exists of two parts, and there will be the part will be partition key and value, and the key is of two parts, and which is partition key and local key. So basically, so recap it. there is a namespace. Inside namespace there is table. Inside table there'll be table range. And inside table range there'll be a bunch of records. And inside record will be of two parts, one key and one value. Key will itself will be of two parts, partition key and local key. So what is the use of partition key? So partition key will tell where the record should exist in which table range. So what it does, as I mentioning that table range is sharded in using hash values. So let's say a partition key, let's say I am calling it a p key 1. Then if hash of a p key 1 falls between 0 to 16, then it should go on a table range 0 to 16, and so on and so forth. So, in other words, a record is tied to a table range based on its hash value of its partition key. Inside table range, key is stored in a sorted order of L key. So basically, once table range has been decided that this record is going to be hosted in a particular table range, then inside the table range, key is stored in sorted order of L key, local key. So basically, keys are ordered alphabetically in a table range, but they are not ordered alphabetically at the table level. Well, this does not work well for prefix scan sort of use cases, where you want to do scan based on prefix of key, but it works well for distributing the key across table ranges evenly, helping in reducing hot data kind of scenario. For example, somebody is writing time series data. So if that's the case, and if you do not use this hash of primary key mechanism, then one table range will become hot, and then the next table range will become hot, and so on and so forth. And another part is each table range physically is backed by a Rocksdb instance. So basically, I'll come to it later, but just to give you a heads up that each table range is essentially a Rocksdb instance in physical level. Oh, so this is a very high level serving architecture. It's very simplistic view of architecture. So what we have it's a gRPC based service. So we have a gRPC client, and then we have a gRPC server. So gRPC clients are of two types currently. One is stateful client, which I used to call, and I still call thick client, and then there is a stateless client, which I call thin client. So stateful client keeps location metadata for the tables. Therefore, it knows about data locality and data affinity, that okay, this data should exist in which node. It knows which record exists in which table range, and which table range exists on which node. So so in that case, it will directly forward the request to the node where record exists or supposed to exist, because if it's a write request, then the record might not exist, right? So and the stateless client, on other hand, does not keep any location information. So if the request will end up on any node, if the node keeps the data, that's fine. And if if the node does not keep the data, then it will forward the data to the node which is supposed to keep the data. So basically, in stateless client, what happens? It uses a direct service URL. So any request based on load balancer can go on any of the nodes, and if that node does not hold the data, it will forward the request to the node which actually is supposed to hold the data or supposed to serve the request. So okay, so what happens when request lands on a gRPC server? So once request lands on gRPC server, gRPC server first write the record in Bookkeeper, and then excuse me, commits locally to the RocksDB. At this time, it also commits the latest bookkeeper transaction ID in the RocksDB. So let's say a node is lost, or local disk is lost, or the data can be, or some other thing happens, data can be recovered from a bookkeeper transaction log. But for how long we'll keep the transaction log, and what if the data is deleted? So coming back to the client, since gRPC based, okay, so we'll talk about that in the next slide. What we are using transaction log exactly for, but yeah, coming back to the client, uh, since it's a gRPC client, shouldn't be difficult to churn out client application, client library in a Go, or of course currently it's in Java. So that's that. Going to the next slide. So what is high level data store architecture? So what we do, essentially we take, in a nutshell, we take snapshot of the data, RocksDB data, and we stick it in a Bookkeeper, and using a distributed log APIs. And once we have to restore it, we use the same distributed log API, read the data from Bookkeeper, read the incremental snapshot from a Bookkeeper, and bring up the RocksDB instance. So that's what it's in a nutshell, but give you more details. So I said a background thread takes incremental snapshot of the RocksDB instance, which is per table range level, as I mentioned in the previous slide as well. That means for each table range, there is one RocksDB instance. Once snapshot is taken, it is stored in one snapshot is taken. It's stored in Bookkeeper using distributed log API. And point to be noted is this snapshot is not taking snapshot of entire database, entire RocksDB. It's incremental snapshot. So basically, what has happened between this a delta. This is basically a delta between the last snapshot and the current one. So let's say what happens when the node is permanently gone, or let's say KTest based pod restarted, right? So in that case, reassignment of table ranges happen. Basically, the table range which is supposed to be existing on the dead node has to be reassigned. Uh, all the nodes basically get JK watch event, and as which node owns what, and this information is kept in Zookeeper, and that sort of triggers a recovery process. Basically, once node is gone, all other nodes will know that, okay, this node is no longer available, gets a watch event, and there is a new allocation for the table ranges, basically new allocation for the data. So now after that, all the nodes which they're supposed to hold the data, they will try to recover the data, recover the table range. So how they recover? First, RocksDB instance is built, as I mentioned before, is built from RocksDB incremental snapshot from Bookkeeper using a distributed log API. So here you can see. So Bookkeeper is having snapshots, and then it goes using distributed log APIs, and then restores and builds the RocksDB instance. And then the transaction log that we have been writing in the previous slide, I mentioned this Bookkeeper, we are writing in Bookkeeper, and then we are generating the transaction logs, right? So those transaction logs were there, and then what we need to do, we replay those transaction log till the last stored transaction ID. So I mentioned in this slide somewhere that when you write to Bookkeeper, we also commit transaction ID to the RocksDB. So when we restore the RocksDB, we know that what is the last committed transaction ID before when the snapshot was taken, and we read that snapshot transaction ID from RocksDB, and we replay transaction log from that transaction ID till the end. So we do not replay transaction logs which is below the one that is stored in the checkpoint. In pardon me, in snapshot. So what is, when we run it? What is our benchmarking results? What are what did we see? So we used benchmarking tool as YCSB. So if anybody does not know what is YCSB, essentially it's the full form for it is Yahoo Cloud Service Benchmark. This is essentially a widely used tool for benchmarking databases, mostly key value stores. So you have to write the YCSV module. So that's what we did. We have written a YCSV module in order to do a state store benchmarking. This is some data that we have. So we were using Kubernetes KTS based deployment. So basically, YCSV was running in one of the pods, and the thread count we kept at 40 threads for YCSB, and the number of pods were 3, and the CPU limit we gave request were 8, and the limit was 16. So essentially, it was running on 8 CPUs, 8 cores, and 24 GB memory. And that was the setup. And we were able to see read throughput as 22,557.7 ops per second with the average latency of 1.699 millisecond. And the write throughput was 15,256.16 ops per second, and slightly a higher average latency, which was 8.82, and the 99 was 27 millisecond. So could we push even further? Yes, we could have pushed even further. We are able to we could go, but that seemed like a pretty sweet spot for us as far as latency and throughput was concerned. So we stopped at that. But we can go further. We can push for higher throughput, and if you are ready to sacrifice on a little bit on latency and 99 percentile. So production readiness, is it already in product? What is the production plan? So is it production ready? Is it production worthy? So in Splunk, it's already in production. We added various tools to administer or list namespaces, tables, table ranges, etc., etc. Tools to clean up data, monitoring and alerting API. At API level as well as at error code level, and so on and so forth. We are planning to add more metrics at table and table range level, which will come soon. And again, it's Kubernetes-based deployment in Splunk, and at this point, it's fairly stable, and it doesn't require too much of manual intervention at this point. Initially, we had a lot of troubles, but we fixed a lot of issues, bugs, and so on and so forth. But currently, it's a fairly stable service with this kind of throughput as like a 240 ops per second is currently average read throughput, and 90 ops per second is read write throughput currently going through the system. Initially, as I mentioned, we used to run into problem like table range not found, and it deadlocks and whatnot, and then entire request getting stuck and so on and so forth. But one by one, we sorted out those issues, and we contributed those small fixes and big fixes and so on and so forth back to open source. So what is our going forward? What is our roadmap? So we have tons of changes that we have done in State Store, and which are still is in Splunk repo. So we contribute most of the changes and bug fixes back to open source, But like I said, still there are some big ticket items still could not be synced to open source uh, because we internally use Gradle, and while open source does not, and so on and so forth. So there are some challenges. We are trying to work through it, and we are trying to contribute all our changes back to open source. Uh, but those changes which does not require any particular build system or small changes, and but really high value changes, for example, those bugs which takes 1 week or 2 weeks to find and 2 lines to fix, those changes has been is being sent back to open source, and they've contributed back to open source. uh, then another thing we want to tackle in near future is storage hardening, basically. So what we do is, in unfortunately in some use cases we end up leaving stale data behind. In order to go to production as fast as possible, we decided that, okay, if there is lingering data behind, lingering data behind is fine. We can go back and clean it up manually, or maybe write a tool around it. Uh, Particularly, it happens when the table ranges move here and there from one node to another node. At the same time, as I mentioned in previous slides, that we use transaction logs. So currently we are not clearing the transaction log, and it's piling up in Bookkeeper. So we have to do proactive cleaning up of the data, as a part of the code itself, as part of process itself, as well as a separate tooling. And then the operability side. So we have to have improved and granular monitoring and alerting. So as I mentioned, we want to have want to implement table level matrix and shard or table range level matrix, etc. We have to provide an alerting based on that. And from the availability side, currently we do not have a replica, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we all traffic which when storage one node goes down, until the node recovers, we cannot take any read or write traffic, because we do not have a replica at this point. And that's why I mentioned that in the initial slide, that and first slide, that which we are strongly consistent, because there is no replica. All the write goes to the same node, and the read also goes to the same node. But going forward, we want to have replica, so that when one node goes down, we should be able to serve at least read traffic from replica immediately, and write traffic can be served from the replica when we catch up with the transaction log, and then elevating replica to the primary when actually primary fails. So this is from the availability side of story. That's something that we want to do going forward. And then another is scaling and load balancing side. So basically, we have no way currently to split a shard and basically table range and move a table range. Move a shard or table range across a cluster on a different node. So these are some of the things that we would like to contribute in near future, and internally as well as in open source. So this brings towards the end of my presentation. These are some of the references. You can see where the state store repo is, where is the distributed log repo, and where is code where we have a Pulsar function integration, and that's it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and listening, and thanks everybody, and hope we get good community participation on this project, and we get good pull request and good contribution from the community.